Here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts. Hey, Pete, ever wonder what Steven Spielberg's favorite film is?
You know, Andy, I've heard he loves classics like Lawrence of Arabia, Meet Me in St. Louis.
Imagine chatting with him about why those films resonate with him so much.
That's exactly what we do on our podcast, Movies We Like. We've had incredible guests like actress Dee Wallace, cinematographer Eric Messerschmidt, director Steve Miner, and former Disney animators Tom and Tony Bancroft.
They share their favorite films and the impact they've had on their careers, offering fascinating insights into the craftsmanship and storytelling techniques that make these movies so special.
If you're curious about the magic behind the scenes, subscribe to Movies We Like from True Story FM on your favorite podcast app. New episodes are released on the fourth Monday of each month with early access for our members.
Join us on Movies We Like as we explore the movies we all like with the people who make them.
And Stephen, our people will call your people. Let's make this happen, puppy.
Subscribe today.
What's up, most excellent friends?
It's Chrissy and Nathan from the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast.
It's a podcast where a filmmaker and a comedian
And their most excellent guests,
adventure their way through the 80s movies we think we love
or might have missed,
with our grown-up eyes to see how they hold up.
join us for delightful discussion,
Rollicking recaps.
ratings, and deep-cut recommendations.
Plus, members get some extra fun chit-chat with the hosts after the show.
Download the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast today at truestory.fm.
Or find it wherever the finest podcasts are stored.
And do remember to keep the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast motto in mind.
Be excellent to each other and...
Party on.
Party on, dudes.
I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to the next reel, when the movie ends.
Our conversation begins.
Ugetsu is over. Success always comes at a price, and we pay suffering.
幸薄き宿命に泣く妻。
私は夫婦共稼ぎで気楽に働いて3人楽しく日を過ごすことができればとそればかりを願っているのです。
欲望に走り妻を忘れた男。
ああ、醍醐味だ。天国だ。
We're talking about Ugetsu, Andy, and Ugetsu is a bit of it's kind of a cheat, right? Because we just had this on a different show.
Movies We Like. Yeah, we talked to production designer Yohei Taneda over on Movies We Like and talked about this film with him over there and had a fantastic conversation. So yeah, this is another of these movies that has kind of crossed over across multiple shows that we do.
Yes, it's very exciting. I, at the last minute, could not be on that particular episode, so I count on you to be supreme educator today as we talk through this movie. Ugetsu, what do you think of this? What do you think of this film the second or third time you watched it?
It really works better and better with each watch. It's just a very kind of haunting film. It's an interesting story about wartime in Japan in this particular period of, was it 16th century Japan? And you're kind of watching how it affects these people that come from these small villages. But you're also getting a sense of how this particular man who is a ceramicist, he is using the wartime to kind of get more money because people are, kind of, I don't know, panic shopping, I guess, maybe. He's selling a lot more of his ceramics and making quite a lot of money.
You remember how the populace handles toilet paper in a crisis, right?
That's right. This was the COVID era toilet paper, right? It's the Japan the disappearance of all the ceramics.
Yes.
It's like the Cabbage Patch doll craze,
right?
Where everybody was rushing to buy the ceramics. But, you get this sense of this person who starts seeing dollar signs or yen signs, I guess, in his eyes and realizes he can just make a lot of money. Even though he's made a lot of money, like at the beginning, he already has a huge sale, makes a ton of money, and potentially can just kind of let it ride for a little bit. But he's seen the signs, he knows he can make more money, and gets greedy. And that's really kind of what happens here. He pushes to go across the lake over to this other place, and it leads to essentially his downfall. And so you're getting this story about a man's greed bringing him down. You're getting like kind of the sense of his vanity of like wanting more for himself and his family. Like a lot of it seems to be he wants to buy more nice things for his wife. He finally can buy her a nice kimono, a nice cloth, and all this sort of stuff, to the point where he's neglecting his family. And what ends up playing into the story so well is the way that they blend, that Mizoguchi blends this ghost story into it as he kind of falls for this other woman. And it really kind of becomes a story of man's downfall, and the grass is always greener. And he has this great life, great family, wonderful wife and son, yet he can't see that and has to go into this situation where he wants more money, falls for this other woman, and thinks that now he's got this better life. And then you see exactly how wartime really affects families with the women who are left behind in both his case and his friend's case. And that's another big side of this story is the women who they leave behind. And so, and then it just builds to that very painful ending that is exceptional. And so it's a film that I don't know, I like it more the more times I watch it.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. This was, going into this next round of looking at the film and what it represents. The first time, it's challenging. It was a challenging watch the first time I sat down with it, because it felt like there were a lot of pieces going on and a lot of war context that I felt like I had to kind of run to keep up. And the second time I realized, wait a minute. This is actually a very, very simple story, a deceptively simple story about two couples, Genjuro and Miyagi, and Tobei and Ohama. And they are going in their respective directions and dealing with their own experiences of greed and acquisition and protecting their family and all of the things that go with this sort of, head of household role in this period, and addressing the distractions of life, right? The distractions of greed and ambition and deceit. And all of this is happening while their wives are suffering at home. Once I was able to wrap my head around the fact that this is actually a much simpler human story, it just sort of unlocked for me. Like I felt this watch, I felt like it was just beautiful, just a beautiful sort of melodic wandering across the Japanese countryside in a time of great trauma for a lot of people. It was captured incredibly. So yeah, I think big fan. The ghosty stuff. If there's a challenge in portraying on screen in this period of filmmaking, it's probably the ghosty stuff. The ghosty stuff, Genjuro is out and about, and he is met by the ghost, Lady
Waksa, yeah.
And her maid, her crone.
Her assistant, I can't remember what her name is.
Yeah, so they're there together. And the twist is we learn that she's not a real person, she is a ghost. And they are both ghosts wandering the plane to find love. How do you feel like this was portrayed narratively and cinematically?
It's very simple in its cinematic style. Like there's nothing effects driven the way that the ghosts are portrayed in this. It's just incredibly simple. And we don't even know for quite a while that she is a ghost, right? She's this well-to-do Lady Waksa who lives in this place nearby to the city that they end up in. I can't remember what the city is, but they go to this other city across the lake, and Lady Waksa and her assistant find him at his pottery. He's selling pottery on the streets and is doing well at it here. He's by himself because his brother-in-law, his whole goal was to make enough money to become a samurai. And that's really what he wants. And he's been already told that the only way you can do that is if you get yourself a suit of armor and a spear. Otherwise, you're useless. Nobody's going to want you. And so they've made a bunch of money, and now he's run off to go buy all of his stuff, much to his wife's chagrin, who's constantly telling him, don't do this, don't do this. And so they have left Genjuro by himself, and he's selling stuff. And that's when Lady Waksa and her servant show up. And it's when he sees her, he's completely taken. I'm curious if there's a trope like, what would that be? Because I feel like this is something where somebody sees a spirit and is immediately taken by their beauty and almost put under a spell, because that's very much what it feels like. I feel like there must be a trope of spirits who kind of put you under a spell with their beauty, and you are drawn into their world, and it's only through the grace of some other person that you're able to kind of pull yourself through it. That's essentially what happens here. Genjuro, they order these pieces of pottery, ask him, please take it to Katsuki Mansion where we live. Later in the day, his brother-in-law hasn't returned, and so he says, I'll go do it. And so he goes over to the manor, and he finds out that the soldiers in the war that's going on had killed everybody. They'd attacked this manor. They killed everybody except these two women. She also says her dad haunts this place. And so we're getting a sense of ghosts, but we're not necessarily getting a sense that she's a ghost. And that's, I think, how it plays it so interesting. We're setting up this idea of spirits and just kind of this haunting sense of this mostly abandoned mansion, but we don't necessarily have this sense right away. And that's what I think it does in a very interesting way, is playing this idea of a ghost story kind of just realistically, where you're interacting with somebody that you think is a real person without ever realizing that it isn't. And it's not like I was watching more this time, like when she and her assistant come to his stall, were there a bunch of other people around that like could have been watching them interact? Not really. They, Mizoguchi directs this in a way where the crowd has kind of dispersed and it's just those two. And so it's entirely possible nobody would have even seen him kind of talking to a ghost, And so, and then he goes off and delivers it directly to her mansion. So definitely no one's seeing it. And so it's done in such an interesting way. And then even through their relationship that develops, and that continues for a while, you don't necessarily get a sense that she's a ghost. I mean, he says some things periodically, like he feels it's strange, but he's still drawn in and totally seduced, and he can't kind of let her go. And so that's, I think, what's so interesting about the ghost element of this film, is like it's not a ghost story that's necessarily designed to scare like a lot of ghost stories. It's a psychological study of how somebody can fall for an idea of something and lose themselves to it.
Yes. Is one of the things that makes it supremely unique, is the fact that it's like straight across the bow. There is an interesting moment in the film after the assistant outs the fact that she's a ghost. Like, we're back here walking the plains. He freaks out and he grabs a sword and he starts swinging it around at the ghosts, and then he runs, and he's outside. He gets captured by some soldiers, and he says, he starts trying to explain what's going on, and they say, you're a lunatic. This sword isn't yours. It's older and belongs to this old guy. There's no way you would have this sword, in other words.
Yeah, you had to have stolen it. Yeah.
You had to have stolen it. That felt like, to me, a weird... I wonder if the movie is remade, if that becomes not a plot element, but a clue to what's happening, without the narrative of the assistant actually explaining everything that's going on. Because I felt like, I just felt like it was a dated sort of tool of cinematics at the time to stop and explain, this is what's happening right now. We're ghosts. We're wandering the plain, and you should devote your life to Lady Wakasa. And I mean, did you get any of that? Does it feel antique in that way?
Maybe, but also I feel like it's the type of story that allows for it to flow that way. Like, I didn't end up having any issues with it unfolding the way that it did. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I don't know if I would have attributed that to an older type of storytelling or a Japanese type of storytelling, because I do feel like, especially, I mean, you look at the way that Lady Wakasa looks, it's very theatrical. Like, she looks almost like you'd see a character on stage. And that's definitely an element that is intriguing. And it does make me wonder if there is this element of just the way that kind of like the Japanese theatrical storytelling style. I mean, you look at Mizoguchi, another film that he did, The Story of the Last Chrysanthemum, is very much made in that way, where it feels very stagey and theatrical. I can't help but think that that might be part of the way I'm approaching it.
I'm glad you bring that up because I think you're probably right on. And I'm looking specifically at Lady Wakasa, who has the makeup, yes, the dark spots on her forehead above her eyes. What does that represent? Do you know?
Those are painted on eyebrows, I think, for their... It has to do... I'm trying to remember if it's only theatrical or if it's just something that richer women were doing at the time. But they would paint on eyebrows above, like those big swashes of eyebrows above their eyebrows that I think was kind of something that the richer women did.
In kabuki, this exaggerated makeup is called kumadori, and it's used to depict a character's personality and status. Black lines generally denote villains. Dark circles could signify, it's a whole list of other things. But one of the things in the other things is supernatural beings. Certain demons, ghosts, or spirits might be depicted with these dark circles as part of their appearance.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Look at that. The internet came through. The internet supplied an answer that does line up with the question.
Yeah, right.
Demonstrating no commitment to correctness. Let's just say that. It's just they line up.
Well, and that's, I think, interesting because it does allow for this theatrical sense that plays in that world in this film, because we're not seeing anything that feels kabuki-esque or theatrical in the rest of the story. It's only in this particular relationship that develops at this mansion, right? That we end up having that sense of style and theatricality.
Yeah, right, which is fascinating. Now, I want to sort of complete Genjuro's and Miyagi's story before we turn back to Tobe, which is a different thing altogether. So Genjuro, he ends up freeing himself. He goes home, right? He meets his wife and his child. Now, what has happened while he was away is that his wife had some food and her child on her back and was walking through the woods and was come upon by brigands, soldiers who were hungry for food, and they took her food and stabbed her with a stick.
Yep.
And then we assume she dies, and it is horrible. It's horrible.
We kind of don't know, though, and I like that it sets it up that way, because she kind of stumbles away from the three of them that are fighting over the food. She stumbles away. Her kid is still on her back, and she kind of goes off screen, and we are like, okay, is she going to make it? She's injured. She clearly was stabbed in the gut, but is she going to make it? And then, so it comes as a bit of a surprise when we get to that final scene.
And she's home, and she looks like she's feeling great. She's been doing her core workouts, like she's doing fine. And her son is sleeping, and there is a reunion. And he goes and he gets his son, who, after significant jostling, does not wake up at all, and he's just a hard sleeper. Don't worry, that's not even a plot element. And he has this time with his wife. He snuggles up with his son on the sleeping mat, and he wakes up and she's not there.
Right.
Then we are met with the neighbor who comes in and says, "Oh, I've been taking care of your son, but you don't know, like your wife was killed, legit killed by soldiers. And
we've been taking care of your son. Yeah.
We've been taking care of your son. And now you have to live with that, right? With that, even though you had this experience last night." I'm curious your perspective on that. Is that a manifestation of grief, or is that an experience of supernatural?
I think it's supernatural. I think the way that it's portrayed in the film, especially because it's a film about ghosts, I can't help but see it as a continuation of the ghost.
It's like they've set the table for that already.
And especially because the way that scene starts. And I think that was a big thing that just beautifully directed. We see Genjuro come home. He walks through the front door. It's all in a single shot. We see him walk through the front door. We're inside the house. He looks around. The house is empty. It's dark. He walks out the side door and kind of comes back around looking, passes by the front again and comes back in. And when the camera pans away to the side door and then it pans back over following him back to the front door, in that time, the set has been reset. There's now a fire burning in the center pit. His wife is there cooking on the stove, and the child is sleeping there and everything. And so suddenly, all in one single shot, we're given a sense of a complete kind of change of the way that this scene appears. And it's interesting because it's like he doesn't quite notice that all of this has changed in his time or looping around the house. And so I find that so fascinating. And perhaps this is actually a blending of both of your points. Perhaps it is her ghost, but because of his kind of core understanding that maybe something is wrong, he's not noticing it. And he goes right into this situation as if this is really his wife. And I think that's such a fascinating way to kind of jump into that. Like he wants to find her so badly that even though he had just been in the house and it was empty, he's totally like, oh, this has to be her, and accepts it.
Yeah, I think I think you're right on both points, that I think it's okay for there to be some sort of blending between these two things, that maybe there is some rationale for her spirit to be lingering there until her son can be made whole with the relationship to her father, or to his father. Maybe also he gets there and gets his sort of the release of awareness of both that she was killed because of his dalliance out in the fields with his pottery and his spirit bride, and also, that he really loved her, right? That he loves his wife and that he came back for her. Like he is made whole by getting that experience too. And yes, now he has to live on with the grief of knowing that she's dead and having to have that early morning awakening. But that doesn't mean that the lesson wasn't a powerful one for him.
Well, and I think it ties into this sense of the story we're getting with him and this journey that his character takes, right? Where he has abandoned his wife. The whole plan this time is to bring the plan is for him and Tobei to go over to this other city across the lake, but both of their wives are like, no, we're coming too. And the whole group goes across the lake. But then after they see this person on the boat who ends up dying, it kind of starts feeling like there's talk of pirates and how dangerous it could potentially be. And he's like, you know what? You got to go home with our kid. So we're going to take you back over and dump you off. Go home, be safe. And they do. So he abandons his wife and goes off. And it's Tobei and his wife who end up coming over with him. And so he kind of leaves his wife behind, and it's this period of war. All of this terrible stuff is happening. She now has to get from the lake back home safely, hopefully. But he completely just loses sight of that. You can argue that Lady Wakasa kind of puts this spell over him to kind of forget about some of these things that are more important to him. But he also knows that those things are there. And it's later, after he's kind of bumped into that Buddhist priest who recognizes that there's some evil presence that has a hold of him and writes all those little prayer words all over his body. That's when he's finally able to admit to Lady Wakasa, I am ashamed. I am actually married. I have a kid, and I just want to go home. And they're like, And he has to kind of almost like fight his way out of there, like go swinging his sword and break himself free of this place. It's not until that moment that it was actually strong enough for him to do. But I think that speaks to, again, this sense of him trying to find something better for himself without acknowledging it. And I think that's his ultimate downfall. Perhaps she manifests at that particular point when he comes home to further cement that in for him.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, it's a dark experience for him, right?
Yeah.
And yet, like, I am drawn by the nature of their relationship and the fact that he eventually came home to find some sort of redemption in the resolution.
Yeah.
And the fact that maybe it's the fact that his son lives on, right? Like maybe it's the fact that his son survived, that she was able to do whatever she did to protect him enough that she could bring him home.
Well, at the end, I mean, we see them after everybody else is kind of reunited. They're serving food, and the son takes a bowl and goes and puts it on mom's cemetery plot.
Yeah, right.
Remembering her. So, yeah.
Let us turn our attention back in time now to our dear friend Tobei.
Yes, Tobei and Ohama.
Tobei and Ohama. And Tobei has a different drive. Tobei wants stuff. And he wants to be a samurai. And he wants all of his wildest dreams to come true. He wants his golden ticket, and he wants it now, mommy.
I think this speaks to a little bit of that immature selfishness, right?
Yeah.
He also is, we don't ever get a sense of his success. Is he just working with Genjuro? Is he also a farmer and sells some of the crops that they grow? They have a pretty big plot that we end up seeing in their place. I don't exactly know, but he cannot let the idea go of becoming a samurai, to the point where he ends up through happenstance falling upon a situation that allows him to end up stealing this famous opposing general's head. It's a odd little setup, but he stumbles across this situation where the general had been injured, and one of his men is with him, and he's just like, "You have to take my head and get it out of here so they can't." Which I was like, okay, that's a dark way to go, but okay.
It's so dark.
He takes the head, kills the guy who beheaded his general, and takes the head and presents it. And now he is awarded. And the guy, I love that the guy kind of recognizes, yeah, you're right. Sure, you killed him, but you know what? You know how to recognize a lucky situation, and you took it. And I'm going to reward you for that. And he gives him a horse and his armor and his men and everything. And the thing that's powerful with all of this, because he loses his wife earlier in the film in that place, in that market where he hides from her, buys this gear to go off and do all of this. And his wife is lost. She ends up getting raped. And for a 1953 film, I was like, they're not really holding back with the horrors of war and the story of these women who end up kind of falling into these situations in this particular period of time, and they would end up becoming comfort women, because that was kind of, you're made into prostitutes because of these armies that were rolling through, and you're losing your husbands, and she ends up getting raped in a scene that really was pretty horrifying by, I don't know, 5 or 6 men. Is like this awful situation. And then the next time we see her, she is working as a prostitute. She's in this a whorehouse, or a place for gentlemen to stop and hang out with all these women, and they run into each other, and that becomes the situation where they have to have that confrontation. And wow.
And her perspective in that conversation is really like, look what you hath wrought. This is what I do every day. And she outlines what she does every day. And it's horrible. What she does is horrible. It's the other side of the pottery story, which is this guy is just looking for every opportunity to fail up, right? He's looking for whatever shortcuts he can find to take advantage of them.
Exactly, yep.
And he is rewarded for that, but superficially. He becomes a stuffed suit samurai, right? He's riding down the street with his vassals and horses and his men, but his men...
spouting fake wisdom.
Right, right. It's just awful. And the lesson he has to learn is, you found what you want, but at what cost? Like, both of these guys are living the at what cost dream. Right? Like they're able to achieve something, but what they lose along the way is what we have to weigh. The fact that he carries a head across the countryside is just straight up gruesome, like bit of happenstance.
Well, and there's an interesting sense of that story in how it resolves. It actually is a happier ending. It sounds like Mizoguchi originally wanted it to be an unhappier ending than we end up getting, kind of in line with the realities of that situation, that they wouldn't have ended up back together. It allowed for it to be, I suppose you could say, a happier sort of ending. He recognizes what he has done and what it has led to for his wife, and they are able to come home and return to the simple life of working on their farm. That kind of allows it to be, I suppose you could say, a happier ending for the couple, even though she had to go down a terrible road for him to learn his lesson. And that's, I think, the real tragic element of that story. I don't know. I'm curious if I would have liked it more, or where my thoughts would be if it didn't necessarily resolve that way.
It is interesting, right? Like, what do you think you would have preferred to see?
Yeah, that's interesting because if at the end, if we had had the two men, like maybe I don't know, I assume that if it had gone that way, what would have happened is he would have seen what had become of his wife, been distraught, she refused to leave or whatever, this is, you've done this to me, and he would have run off and either ended up in a situation where he ended up getting himself killed or given up the samurai life and gone back to the farm. And it would have been maybe all the more depressing to have the two men there working on their ceramics and farm just in kind of
Alone.
misery. Yeah. It could have been
alone.
pretty horrifying.
And even more so that Genjuro is there with the constant reminder of what his decisions had led to, the fact that his son is still alive and he's lost his wife.
Yeah.
Well, we've made a much darker movie.
Well, it's interesting that Mizoguchi actually thought that like that was the direction that he wanted to go, but it sounds like the studio didn't want to go quite that unhappy, and so had him keep it where they would end up reuniting and coming home. Which, I mean, in the scope of the film, I suppose you can say it ends up working because we end up getting this. Comeuppance is really not the right word, but you do get this sense that at least he's learned his lesson, right? You see Tobei, they're crossing a bridge and he throws all of his armor and his spears and everything over it into the water. And just like that's his shedding of that false life that he thought was what he wanted.
Right. I thought it was pretty powerful. Now, this movie, what do you now have gone through the conversation with a fantastic production designer on movies we like. Talk a little bit about the design and direction. What did you learn?
Well, I mean, it's definitely a film that has a lot of art and thought put into it, right? Like I can't remember specifically at what points, but I mean, to the point where their production designer was like painting individual leaves on trees to be black to give it a starker look with the way that things were going to feel. And I think that was kind of an important element of it. And creating those moments that kind of make it feel like it's not real. And I think the perfect example of that in this film is the lake in the fog. One, there's something always about like older movies that are filmed on places like this where it still feels like a stage, like their voices almost feel like they're echoing in a stage a little bit. And I can't help but that actually lends to that sense of disconnect that we have, the way that, I mean, it feels very much like a ghost story when we're on this creepy lake in the fog.
And what is the lake? The lake represents, I think, the crossing, a crossing over.
Right. Crossing over of water in Japanese stories does kind of put you in this place where you're moving into a place where you're more connected to the spirits and the spirit realm and all of that. And so by crossing over this lake, as we've already mentioned, they run into another boat as they're crossing with a person on it who's dying from an attack by pirates. And that's pretty haunting to run into that and have that presence there. So it already feels like a lake of death. And it just like the fog and everything, it just gives you this sense that we're entering another type of story, that it's not necessarily just a period piece.
Right. I think it's beautiful. I mean, you were talking about, water and this kind of filming water that makes it look like it's still on a stage. I don't know that I was taken there. I felt like the whole thing was on a stage, so I think I was already deeply in it by the time we got to the water.
That could just be something that just watching older films that I recognize, like, Gun Crazy is another really strong film, but it has this interesting finale that always feels like it's also kind of in a swamp, as I recall. And it always feels like it's so stagey, but I can't help but feel like there's something intentional about that. Just the sound feels, it has this sense of kind of like hollowness to it. So anyway, I don't know. I felt that way with it, and it just lent for me to just kind of that experience of this isn't reality at this particular point.
Yeah. Which is good. I mean, that's what we want.
Oh, absolutely.
That was the goal.
Yeah. Well, and just speaking to just kind of the look, when, in the conversation with Yohei on Movies We Like, one of the other films that he had worked on was When Marnie Was There, the Studio Ghibli film, which is also a ghost story. And he had talked about how that was this film was kind of inspiration for his work on that film and coming up with some of the looks and the designs and everything. And there's a lot of water in that film also. And that's another part, because from where our protagonist meets Marnie, it's across a body of water where this old house is that Marnie had used to live in. And it's, again, another really interesting way to kind of capture a sense of a ghost story in this place where you're crossing water, where there's this representation of this other world that you're kind of entering into as you kind of make that journey.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Cinematography, I mean, might as well drop the name. Kazuo Miyagawa, even as stagey as it sometimes felt, like really patient, long, fluid takes and camera movements, right? It's a really elegant kind of motion in the film, super atmospheric. And I think that, we talked about the water as a transition. I feel like those are really seamless transitions between reality and fantasy. And I almost wanted less of a seamlessness to it. Like I could have used a little bit more transition to up the dramatic intensity so that I knew more than the character did. And I thought that was interesting. But generally, I think the way he composed these shots that are so classically Japanese, built with these sort of classical Japanese scroll paintings and things like that, I thought it was just really elegantly, portrayed.
Yeah.
And lensed.
Yeah. And, he's a cinematographer who's worked with a lot of prominent Japanese filmmakers. Akira Kurosawa, he did Rashomon and Yojimbo with him. He worked more with Mizoguchi on films like Sancho the Bailiff, and would go on to do things like Floating Weeds with Ozu. So certainly a prominent cinematographer. And actually, I was talking about painting the leaves. I actually think it was Rashomon where he was actually painting all of the leaves to kind of create this look with the rain and everything. Regardless, I mean, I think just a prominent cinematographer, and the way that he captures this is interesting, though, that you mentioned the idea of wanting more hint of what might be going on. And I'm curious about that, because this, like we were talking about, this is a ghost story where you don't necessarily recognize immediately that you're in this ghost story. After having said that, I mean, do you feel like it would have helped you to know that we've kind of entered this ghost story without them knowing it, but you knowing it?
Certainly not at first, but I like the idea of a progression of a reveal, right? That we get increasingly close to something is funky here, right? If you're not like up on Japanese symbolism and water crossings being, a state of transformation, it looks like you're just on a lake and they're just going someplace, right?
Yeah.
And I also recognize it's the 50s, and filmmaking technology is such that it's maybe more sort of cartoonish or clumsy to introduce less seamlessness, right? Seamless transitions are easy because you don't have to do anything. Right? You literally do nothing, and you introduce some new characters and some different costumes, and you're there. And I think what I'm looking for is a little bit more of a progression of intensity of transformation or transition between reality and fantasy.
Yeah, interesting. I can see that. For me, I guess I just ended up liking it because it doesn't feel like, I don't know, I guess because the fact there's not a transition, it keeps me kind of doubting the idea of it. And I think that's, you don't see that often with ghost story films. And that's what I thought was interesting about it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Have you watched much Mizoguchi? Are you familiar with him as a filmmaker?
No. In fact, I was delighted to see just the connection of Miyagawa to Kurosawa, because, suddenly, it's like punch buggy, right? Like you see one VW bug and suddenly you see them all. And now I can't see a mention of Rashomon without a mention of Ugetsu right alongside of it. And until we were going to talk about it for Movies We Like, I had not heard of Ugetsu. Like it was complete blind spot for me. So, I've got some work to do.
He's one of those filmmakers that I've known about for quite a while. I've seen far fewer films. I mean, I've seen most of Kurosawa's films, so definitely I've seen fewer of Mizoguchi's. But one of those filmmakers whose who has a lot of films that I want to see. Like I've heard of Sancho the Bailiff, and that's one I want to see. The Life of Oharu he did right before this, another one I want to see. The only other one of his that I've seen is The Story of the Last Chrysanthemums, which, as I was saying, is like, that one feels like you're kind of watching something that was designed for the stage. Like the way that he crafts the film is very, very theatrical, and it's a very interesting production because of it. But but this is a filmmaker who started in the silent era in 1923, and unfortunately, a lot of his, or a number of his silent films have been lost, sadly, but worked up until 56 and made dozens and dozens of films. And I just feel like there's just a lot of him that I just know very little about. And I feel like he's a filmmaker I should investigate a little more.
Yeah, me too. I think just in general, so to have this movie thrust on me like this as a completely out of the blue, new watch, and then to see how it is considered one of the greatest Japanese films ever made, and just its resonance in introducing, Western audiences to Japanese film, it just is shocking to me, right? It's like it's a cold water bath because it's really out of nowhere and obviously deserved of its praise. Like it's a great film.
Great performances, great style, just the whole thing has this tone that just feels incredibly haunting, and it's beautiful. It's just a very strong film. We didn't mention that it's based on Ueda Akinari's book Ugetsu Monogatari, and actually I think as Mizoguchi had his screenwriters Matsutaro Kawaguchi and Yoshikata Yoda work on the script, they adapted, I think, Ugetsu Monogatari as some short stories, and I believe they took a few of the different stories and kind of blended them to kind of come up with this one. And I think it works. I like it.
Yeah, me too.
All right.
What else we got?
I think that's it. So we'll be right back. But first, our credits.
The Next Reel is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson, music by Elon Peretz, Patrick Sebag and Evev Bahar, Oriel Novella, and Eli Catlin. Andy usually finds all the stats for the awards and numbers at the-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. You can find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show. It's late. You're curled up on the couch. The lights are low. You hit play on another horror movie hoping for a good scare. But lately, it's all been the same. Jump scares, predictable plots. You crave something more unsettling. You crave the kind of ghost story that stays with you long after the credits roll, the kind that makes you question the shadows in your own home. You need Letterboxd. Letterboxd is a community of film lovers, just like you, who understand the power of a truly great ghost story. They're sharing their discoveries, their reviews, their passion for the films that truly chill you to the bone. Imagine unearthing hidden gems from the far corners of horror cinema, reading nerve-tickling reviews that send shivers down your spine, connecting with a community that shares your love for the macabre. This Halloween season, let Letterboxd be your guide to the world of unforgettable ghost stories. And right now, you can enhance your Letterboxd experience and support the film lovers here at the Next Reel family of film podcasts. Just visit thenextreel.com/letterboxd or use the code NEXTREEL at checkout for 20% off a pro or patron membership. You'll unlock exclusive features, support the fantastic Letterboxd team, and join the Next Reel family. Just be careful what films you choose. Some stories are best left undisturbed. Award season, Andy, as a movie that changed, the landscape of Asian cinema forever, you'd think it would win some awards. Did it?
It actually did. Yes, it did indeed.
Outstanding.
It had 6 wins with 2 other nominations. At the Oscars, it was nominated for 1956 in the Oscars, so a few years later, for Best Costume Black and White, but lost to the film I'll Cry Tomorrow. At the Venice Film Festival, it won the Silver Lion. It was actually, it was interesting. It was nominated for the Golden Lion. The Golden Lion of St. Mark is the top award at the Venice Film Festival. But this was interesting. The jury, having examined the films in competition and noting the considerable average high level of the motion pictures presented, found that no work prevailed in terms of absolute value. In accordance with Article 20 of the 1953 regulation, the jury requested from the president of the festival the authorization not to award the Grand Prix, which was finally granted. Instead, the jury decided to award the Silver Lion to 6 films. So all of these films were nominated for the Golden Lion, but because they were all so good, they didn't actually award it to anybody. Instead, they gave them all the Silver Lion. And so along with I Vitelloni, Little Fugitive, Moulin Rouge, Sadko, and The Adulteress, this film won a Silver Lion in Venice. Very strange, very strange.
When everybody's special, Andy, no one is.
No one is, exactly. Mizoguchi also won the Passanetti Award. This is one of the collateral prizes there. It's dedicated to Francesco Passanetti, an Italian director, screenwriter, film critic, and photographer, and it's awarded by the Sindacato Nazionale Giornalisti Cinematografici Italiani. Whew.
That was great.
Yeah.
That was almost as good as my Letterboxd read.
The Italian Syndicate of National Film Journalists, basically.
Okay.
Over at the Mainichi Film Awards, this was some film awards in Japan, sponsored by Mainichi Shimbun, one of the largest newspaper companies in Japan since 1946. It was actually the first film festival in Japan. It won Best Art Direction and Best Sound Recording. And last but not least, in 1959, much later, it was actually one of the top films awarded at the Cahiers du Cinéma for the top 10 of that year, in apparently release in France.
Apparently. All right. Also, apparently, because this movie was so popular and the 50s are a real boon for you to find numbers, box office numbers. I know you have just a lot of data to mine. How did this do at the box office?
Yeah, well, because of the success of his previous film, The Life of Oharu, the previous year, Mizoguchi was offered the chance to make another film at Daiei Film Studios with complete artistic control and a large budget. But, as you were so apt to poke at me about, unfortunately, I have just no idea how large that budget was. Details are incredibly scarce. This film released March 26, 1953 in Japan, and then on September 7th, 1954 in the US, the same week as Jack Webb's Dragnet. Like the budget, I also have no idea how this film actually did at the box office. There is some data in recent years for anniversary screenings, but nothing about its first release, so this will have to go down in our books as yet another film with no financial data.
Adjusted profit per finished minute of null. That's so sad.
I know. It's always a heartbreaker. But what are you going to do?
Well, I'll tell you, this movie was a heartbreaker, but in the best way. I had a blast watching it again. It really grew on me between viewings, and thrilled to have it in the collection.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great film. I'm glad we're kicking off our Ghost Stories series with this one because it has this presence for ghost stories that just works incredibly well, and it doesn't necessarily need to just create huge scares with crazy effects in order to deliver a very compelling story.
I have to tell you, I legitimately put out of my head that this is a Ghost Story series and that I have to watch many more of these.
Yeah, I know. This is great. And especially now that I know you don't like ghost stories.
Yeah.
Might be my favorite series. I might have to return to this one more and more.
I aim to be trained, Andy. I am your willing servant.
Hey, any chance to get the Changeling into the show at some point? I'm 100% down.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll be right back for our ratings. But first, here's the trailer for next week's movie, Kiyoshi Kurosawa's 2001 film, Pulse.
意識、霊魂、何と呼んでもいいんだけど、それを受容できるエリアっていうのは残念ながら無限大ではなかった。インターネットって勝手に向こうから繋がっちゃうもんなの？でもいつか必ずいっぱいになる。そしたら魂は別のエリア、つまりこっちの世界へ進出してくるしか方法がない。どうして つまり回路が開かれた。
それ貸して。あれ。
回路。
It was a dark and stormy night when a cranky film fan named Ebenezer found himself alone in his living room watching his favorite classic movies. As the clock struck midnight, a ghostly figure emerged from the screen. It was the spirit of classic cinema. Ebenezer, I have come to show you the wonders that await you as a member of the Dex Reels family of film podcasts.
Bah, humbug. I don't need any memberships. I'm content with my old DVDs and streaming services.
Come with me, Ebenezer. Let me show you what you're missing.
Ah, fine, I'll humor you. But this better be worth my time.
Behold the ghost of podcasts past.
Of all the podcasts in all the world, you had to miss out on these, Ebenezer. The engaging discussions and unique perspectives on the films you love. That's the stuff dreams are made of. I suppose I have been missing out on some interesting conversations.
And now, the ghost of podcasts present. Oh, Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. We're in a world of early access, ad-free episodes, and a vibrant community of film lovers on Discord. Lick your heels 3 times, Ebenezer, and join the Next Reels membership.
Ad-free episodes and a community of film lovers? That does sound tempting.
Finally, the ghost of podcasts yet to come. Ebenezer, join the Next Reels membership, and together we can rule the galaxy of film appreciation. For just $5 per month or $55 per year, you'll unlock a wealth of exclusive content and forge powerful friendships. It is your destiny.
Only $5 a month or $55 a year for all that? It's starting to sound like a steal. I see it now. I've been a fool to resist the benefits of being a member. No more shall I be a cranky film fan. I'm ready to join the Next Reels membership and embark on a new journey of cinematic discovery.
And with that, Ebenezer awoke, realizing it had all been a dream, but one that had shown him the true value of being a part of the Next Reels family of film podcasts. He eagerly visited truestory.fm/join and became a member that very day, unlocking a world of exclusive content, private Discord channels, and a deeper appreciation for the magic of the movies. Join Ebenezer and countless other film fans in supporting the Next Reel. Head to truestory.fm/join and become a member today for just $5 per month or $55 per year.
Letterboxd, Andy. Letterboxd. You know Letterboxd. We just talked about it. It's our favorite community of film lovers, and we just need to now assign hearts. And you know how excited I get about hearts.
Yes, Pete loves his hearts. Yes, he does. Where do they come from? We now know they come from the bowels of Pete's stomach.
They come from my mouth. So tell me, Andy, what are you going to do for Ugetsu?
You know, I think this is a film that will continue growing with me. I still don't necessarily want to give it 5 stars, but it could be there. Last time I watched it, it was 4 stars. I think I'm at 4.5 with it right now. I'm just ever impressed with what this film is doing and the world that Mizoguchi creates.
And how many times have you watched it?
2 now.
2 now. Okay. You know, I think because I am no half stars right, I'm kind of with you. Like the next stop is probably 5 stars, but I think I'll probably just stick at 4 stars and a heart for right now. Can I put a reason on that? You know, not a very good one. Is it a great movie? Yes, this is a great film. And does it change the way I live my life? No, not yet.
Not yet. But it might. Yeah. One day.
It might.
Yeah. Well, you know, next time a war rolls around, you're going to start thinking, should I run to town and sell my ceramics?
I'm going to be looking for loose heads. I can tell you that.
Right. That's always the first thing.
Always look for a loose head.
How can I use this to my advantage?
That's really a personality test, right? Like, are you Team Potter or Team Headhunter? Like, if you could choose a superhero power, would you be flight or invisibility? Like, that tells you a lot about a person.
It does, yeah. Are you going to use your wiles and find a head?
Yeah. Are you just going to work hard and make more pots, or are you going to cheat and find a loose head?
Yeah.
Right? That tells you a lot about a person.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Dark.
Now I want to be a potter. Now I'm just a potter. I don't like what it says about me the other way.
I want you to have in the side of your house a wall where you can actually, it's your furnace and it's just kind of embedded in the side of your house and you can clay it up every time you're making your pots again. That's a fantastic design.
I want that. And what decorates the wall is the Game of Thrones headroom of She Has No Name,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, we figured out the decor, at least. Heads and pots. You can have them both.
The whole thing. Well, remember, you can find us over at Letterboxd. You can find me at Soda Creek Film. You can find Pete at Pete Wright. And you can find the show at The Next Reel. So what did you think about Ugetsu? We would love to hear your thoughts. Hop into the Show Talk channel over in our Discord community where we will be talking about the movie this week.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Letterboxd giveth Andrew.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
Oh, it so does. Okay. Well, in this case, it actually doesn't quite as much. It wasn't quite as much humor that I was looking for.
Yeah, it's hard to write humor with a film like this, but yeah, not a ton.
I don't know. You brought the jokes today. You want to go first? Tell me what you got.
I got a short and sweet 5-star film by Adai077, who had this to say, "Ugh, men."
It just needs a hashtag am I right at the end to really polish it off. I have one of equal substance from Tyler, which has 0 stars. It's just a non-star. I mean, it's a non-star. And it says, let me get the beat. Don't go chasing waterfalls, 'cause a sex ghost at the end will seduce you. That's it. He should have totally written the rest of the song, because that's a banger of a song. First of all, Waterfalls.
That's
definitely
funny,
go check out that song. But here's the thing: the top most active review, it comes from 2021, and I'm going to read it anyway because it's such a surprise. Very unsettling, specifically with sound. Lots of eerie noises going on throughout the entire thing. Never felt like I was being talked down to either. A refreshingly nuanced take on greed. Ceramics. That has the most hearts, the most likes on Letterboxd for this movie. People, come on. We can do better than that.
I mean, we all love Karsten, but...
We do. We all love Karsten, but come on. Like, we need to write some really... I want the jokes. Somebody bring the jokes. I want to be able to read this as a tight 2 minutes, and I want to just laugh my ass off at the end. Come on. That's what we need. That's what we need out of this.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be the one to write that review, but somebody on Letterboxd can. I need a funny review of Ugetsu on Letterboxd, please.
Here.
All right. Thanks, Letterboxd.